Hey guys, tonight we travel back to a world of morning frost, wooden bowls, and the echoing clang of church bells, where your day begins before the sun rises, and your breakfast isn't so much a meal as it is survival. You're not a knight or a noble, no tonight. You are a medieval peasant. You wake not to the scent of roasted meats or spiced buns, but to the musty breath of livestock in your cottage, the stiff ache in your back from sleeping on straw, and the grim knowledge that your first bite of the day may be yesterday's leftover gruel if you're lucky. There's no coffee, no eggs and bacon. You're about to walk miles in the cold, till soil with blistered hands, and pray there's no rain, but first you must eat. Just don't expect it to be delicious. You probably won't survive this century, much less the winter, and breakfast won't help much either. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere across the globe, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with a sharp draft slipping through the cracks of your timber-framed cottage. You stir awake beneath a rough woolen blanket, your limbs stiff, your stomach already murmuring its hunger. Outside the village stirs slowly, a barking dog, the lowing of cows, the soft thump of a wooden pail hitting the well's edge. Your home smells of stale straw and the faint tang of wood smoke from last night's dying fire. There's no pantry, no fridge. Instead, a sack of oats leans against the wall, your first hope of breakfast. You shuffle to the hearth. The ashes are cold. You blow gently and coax a few embers to life, feeding them thin twigs and eventually a split log. The light grows. So does your hunger. You're thinking of pottage, maybe thin, maybe thick, maybe spiced with a pinch of onions, if your garden gave anything this week. Pottage, a simple stew of grain and water, is your life's constant. Breakfast, lunch, and supper. It doesn't change, only shifts slightly in texture and flavor. This morning you toss in what little barley you have left. A sliver of last night's turnip. No salt, you ran out days ago. You stir the pot with a stick scrape and a few dried peas and add water. It bubbles slowly, and you sit in the silence waiting. Across the dirt floor your children rise. They're thin but alive. That's victory. You tear a crust from the coarse brown rye bread that's been hardening for 2 days and dip it in the bubbling pottage to soften it. One bite, then another. It's bland, chewy, a little sour, but it fills the space. You pass a bit to each child, careful to leave enough for later. The bread is dark, not because you like whole grains, but because it's all you can afford. Rye and barley, the poor man's grain. Wheat is for the manor table. You've heard of white bread. You've seen it passed to priests. But it's not for you. You chew slowly. There's a bit of grit in your mouth, probably bits of stone from the millstone. It grinds into your teeth, but you're used to it. Everyone's teeth here are worn down. Some are missing. There's no choice. You swallow. Sometimes you dream of eggs. Chickens, after all, live in your yard. But eggs are precious either for market or to hatch more chickens. You'd rather go without than sacrifice your one good layer. Occasionally on feast days or after long toil you might get one. But not today. Not in the dead of winter when hens stop laying and the frost makes every movement slower. On special days you might add a bit of ale to your breakfast. Not strong ale, small ale. It's weak, just enough to be safer than water. Everyone drinks it, even the children. The river might look clean, but you know better. Small ale is boiled and brewed, and that means it won't kill you. It's warm, a little sour, and goes well with the grainy mash in your bowl. You glance at the window, or what passes for one. A hole with a wooden shutter. Outside, the sun peaks above the thatched roofs of the village. Smoke curls lazily into the sky from neighboring cottages. Someone's already in the field. You wipe your mouth and rise. No time to dawdle. You scrape the last of the pottage into a wooden bowl, cover it with a cloth, and tuck it away in a cool corner. That's lunch if you can get back in time to eat it. You grab your wool cloak worn thin at the elbows, and your leather boots cracked and patched with cloth. There's no time for more breakfast. There's no desire either. Food is fuel and the fire is lit. You step outside and greet your neighbor with a nod. He's chewing something probably the same as you. No one complains. No one brags. Everyone is tired, hungry, and bound by the same rhythm. There's a small patch of leeks near your door. They won't be ready for another few weeks, but they promise something different. A garnish. A flavor. You smile to yourself and walk on. In the distance, the manor house glows in the morning light. You won't go there today, but its presence lingers. That's where the good food lives. The meat, the white bread, the honeyed cakes. You've heard of them. Maybe once when you were younger you tasted one at a fair. It was like eating sunshine. But for now, the taste of boiled barley and rye crust still sits on your tongue. It's your breakfast. It's your life. And it's just enough to keep you going. You make your way toward the field, your breath fogging in the crisp morning air, your stomach quiet for now. Behind you, the cottage settles smoke, trailing upward children chasing chickens in the yard. You'll return when the sun dips low and the world begins to dim again. But for now, it's time to work and to pray. The hunger doesn't return before the day ends. You walk along the muddy path that leads past the church, its stone bell tower casting a long shadow across the village square. The sound of that bell had woken you earlier than your body wanted, as it always does. Time isn't something you measure by clocks. It's measured by light, by bells, and by the growl in your stomach. And this morning your stomach had growled louder than usual. The fields await you. Open, damp, unforgiving. Each footstep squelches in the early dew, and already your boots are heavy with mud. The morning is gray, the kind of gray that sinks into your clothes and makes everything feel heavier. But this isn't a day for rest. There are no weekends, no breakfast in bed, just one long stretch of labor until dusk. But as you trudge forward, your mind drifts perhaps to better mornings. Maybe to that one day last autumn when your cousin came from the next village over bringing with him a small wheel of cheese. Real cheese. You remember the saltiness, the tang, the soft give when you bit in. You had it with bread, and it almost felt like feasting. Breakfast that day felt like a banquet. But that was a rare joy, the kind that vanishes as quickly as it came. Most mornings you return to the same basics, coarse bread, thin gruel, and the ache of wanting more. You reach the edge of the fields where a few others have already gathered. Faces you've known your whole life. All of you are bound by the same fate, bound to the land, to the seasons, to the whims of the weather, and the Lord who owns it all. You nod at each other unspeaking. Words waste energy. One man coughs. It's a deep cough, wet and raw. You wonder if he'll last the season. Illness comes easily when your food is thin and the nights are cold, and no one here has the strength to spare. No one eats well enough to fight off what creeps in through your lungs or festers in your gut. You bend down and begin to work. The rhythm of it sets in quickly, dig, pull, toss, repeat. The soil is heavy and unforgiving after last night's frost. You wipe your brow with the sleeve of your tunic. Hunger is starting to whisper again, even though you just ate. That's the way of it. Your breakfast fills only the hollow space of dawn, it does not linger. You glance down at your hands. Dirt-caked fingernails, cracked skin. A splinter from last week still sits in your palm, red and angry. But you work through it. Everyone does. Pain and hunger are familiar companions here, woven into each morning like the smoke from your hearth. You allow yourself a small break and sit on a nearby stone wall. From the pouch at your side, you pull out the last bit of bread from breakfast. It's gone dry now, more like a biscuit than anything soft. You chew it slowly, holding each bite like it matters, because it does. This might be the last thing you eat until sunset. No butter, no jam, not even a smear of animal fat. Just bread. And yet you savor it because it's what you have. You think of those who eat worse or not at all. Old Margaret down by the stream, her husband gone, her body bent, living off charity and the kindness of neighbors. You shared a turnip with her once. She wept when you did. A breeze rolls across the fields, and you feel the cold bite at your cheeks. Your belly still churns, still asks for more. But your hands are needed again, so you rise. You keep working, and as you do, the hours slip by. By midday, the gray has lifted a little. A shaft of sunlight breaks through the clouds and lays a golden trail across the thatched roofs of your village. It doesn't warm much, but it reminds you that the world still turns and the season will shift. Maybe your garden will give you leeks soon. Maybe a neighbor will trade a few beans for help mending a roof. Maybe. Your mind, dulled by repetition, starts to wander again. You think of breakfast in noble households, tales passed down through gossip and rare glimpses. White bread, sausages, poached eggs with herbs, meat in the morning, imagine that. A thing so foreign it almost feels like sin. They say the Lord's children drink warm milk with honey. You haven't tasted honey in 3 years. Not since that comb you found in the woods, hidden high in a tree full of golden treasure. You brought it home like a thief, your heart racing. You shared it with your wife and children in the dead of night, licking your fingers clean of sweetness. But such breakfasts are not for you, not for any peasant. Yours is the diet of endurance, not pleasure. Grain to keep your limbs moving, water to keep your breath steady. That's all. Still, there are days when breakfast offers more. Feast days. Holy days. If the church celebrates sometimes, so do you. A thicker stew, bread with herbs baked in, a fried cake if oil can be spared. You remember one saint's day when someone brought apples. You had forgotten how bright and crisp they tasted, like sunlight turned into fruit. You wonder what tomorrow's breakfast will bring. Probably the same. But that's life here, and you've made peace with it. Another break. Another crumb of bread. A sip of small ale. Your stomach is still not satisfied, but it has been taught silence. You feel it shrink to accommodate your life. In the distance, a rooster crows again, confused. The church bell answers. It's not yet vespers, but the day is well underway. And even now you think back to that pot of pottage cooling in the corner of your cottage. Thin, yes, but waiting. And it will taste a little better after a day of work, as all food does. And when you return, that will be your supper. But here now the remnants of breakfast keep you moving barely. You shift the weight of the hoe in your hand, crack your neck, and keep going. That's all there is to do. The sun creeps higher, though you don't see it. Much clouds hang low, a dull sheet stretching from one side of the sky to the other. But you feel it on your skin, just enough to loosen the frost in the soil and sweat from your brow. You pause only briefly, wiping your hands against your tunic, before continuing the relentless tilling. Each motion is a rhythm, each ache a quiet drumbeat beneath your skin. The land you work isn't yours. You know that deeply, instinctively. It belongs to the lord of the manor, to his title, his birthright. But it's your hands that feed it, your knees that kneel in the dirt, and your mornings, your breakfasts, that give you barely enough to rise and serve again. This is your life. And it starts each day the same on an empty stomach, with a wooden spoon and a hope that the barley lasts the month. Still you dream. As the iron tool breaks into the soil again, you let your thoughts drift this time to your neighbor Gerd's breakfast 2 days ago. He had a sliver of bacon. Actual meat. It came from a pig his family had raised and slaughtered during the Michaelmas fair. Just a strip boiled with grain, the fat rendering into the broth. He said the scent alone made his eyes water. That morning his children smiled more than usual, laughed even. You remember that? You hadn't dared to ask for a taste, but your own bowl of pottage that morning felt a little sadder, a little more watery, as you thought of what bacon might have felt like in your mouth, chewy, fatty, smoky. Something solid, something that bites back. But such richness is rare. Pigs are hard to keep unless you're fortunate or clever. Most peasants can't risk slaughtering them too early. Better to fatten them for a feast, or trade with the reeve for grain or salt. Instead, your protein comes in quieter forms. Beans when the harvest is good, peas soaked overnight. Lentils if you've managed to keep them dry through the damp season. They bulk up the morning mash, make it feel a little heavier in the belly. But you can't forget, they're still just plants. They don't stick to your ribs like meat does. You think again of eggs so common now in your imagination, so absent in reality. Your hen laid one last week, and your wife boiled it gently, cut it into 4 pieces, and shared it among the children. You didn't take a bite. Watching their faces as they tasted yolk and salt was breakfast enough for you that day. Parents eat last. That's the unspoken rule. Sometimes a traveling peddler comes through the village with strange things. Dried fish wrapped in cloth, tiny wheels of goat cheese, little pots of honey sealed with wax. You've bought from him once, traded half a basket of turnips and a woven sack for 2 salted herrings. You kept one and gave the other to the priest. That morning you cooked your herring with a handful of leeks and poured the broth over rye bread. The salt stung your tongue at first. It had been months since you'd tasted anything so sharp. But it warmed your belly in a way that pottage never could. It made you feel for a fleeting moment like someone else, someone who ate more than they prayed, someone who walked with energy instead of aching legs. Those mornings stick with you. They become stories retold in quiet voices while working or whispered to children before sleep. Remember when we had that herring, you might say, and they will nod and smile. It becomes legend. But today's breakfast didn't carry any such magic. Just grain and water boiled again and again until it thickened enough to hold shape in a bowl. You'd flavored it with onion, barely a slice, and a pinch of wild herbs you gathered near the edge of the wood. No salt. That had run out last week. You might beg a pinch from a neighbor or trade a bit of firewood if the reeve allows it. You think about salt more than you ever thought you would. It's more precious than coin, more treasured than words. Salt makes even the poorest pottage feel like food. But it's not easy to come by. You hear the Lord receives blocks of it from far-off ports, carted in barrels, packed tight. But it rarely makes its way to you unless you're clever or lucky. You bite the inside of your cheek as you recall a story, the kind that circulates during long days of work. One of the old men said that in France, peasants eat roasted chestnuts for breakfast in winter, sweet warm roasted on coals. You've never had a chestnut. You don't know if you believe him. But the image stays with you, just like the idea of porridge made with milk instead of water. Real milk. Not the thin skim your wife tries to collect after the cow's calf has had its share. Milk porridge sounds like something that would carry you through a whole day, something that would quiet your stomach longer than an hour. You've only had it once years ago, when your cousin married, and they celebrated with real dairy. You've never forgotten the richness of it, how it clung to your spoon and your memory. A shout pulls you back to the field. Someone's found a broken tool. You offer to help mend it, and while your hands work, your mind stays fixed on food. Always food. Every peasant thinks about breakfast long after they've eaten it, because it never lasts. It's not just about hunger. It's about what breakfast means. It's the quiet promise that you made it through the night, that you've survived another round of cold, disease, wolves, or fire. It means the roof didn't fall in, and the grain sack wasn't stolen, and the child with the fever kept breathing. Breakfast is survival, but it's also ceremony. You eat with your family even in silence. You divide what little you have. You eat from the same pot, drink from the same jug, dip bread into the same bowl. It's not just eating, it's communion. So tomorrow when you rise, when you touch the cold floor with bare feet and reach again for the barley sack, you'll be doing more than cooking. You'll be reminding yourself that life continues, that somehow you are still here. And even if it's the same bowl of pottage with the same few onions and the same old bread, you'll still eat it like it matters. Because it does. You keep working until the ache in your back becomes part of the rhythm. The weight of the tool, the weight of your limbs, the weight of your life, all of it blends into one steady motion. But even now, as your hands dig and your knees bend, you're thinking about that pot back home. That little pot with the thin smear of pottage left clinging to its side. It's cold by now, but it's still yours. Still waiting. You wonder if your wife has scraped it out for the children, or if she set it aside for you. These choices are unspoken. Small kindnesses, passed without words in glances and gestures. A shared crust, a warmed bowl. In a world where food is fleeting, the memory of it lingers longer than the taste. Mid-morning comes, and with it a short break. You sit with the others under the hedgerow, wiping sweat from your brow. No one speaks much. Energy is precious. But a few of the older men pull out their satchels, frayed cloth tied with twine, and produce their morning rations. One has a few dried apples, brown and withered. Another unwraps a hunk of hard cheese, probably goat's milk, sharp and crumbling. You pretend not to stare. You pretend you're not hungry again already. But your belly growls and your mouth waters. You don't begrudge them. You know what it means when someone has cheese this early in the day. They've traded well, or their goat hasn't died, or their cousin lives near the monastery and passed along a gift. It's not luck, it's survival, it's relationships, and sometimes it's just grace. You pull out what you have left, just a sliver of bread, mostly crust. You chew it slowly like it's something more. The man beside you offers a slice of apple. You hesitate, then accept. It's tart, slightly dry, but it sings in your mouth. You nod thanks, and the moment passes. That's breakfast, too. Not just what you ate back home, but what you eat here in the field, in the quiet company of others who are just as tired and just as poor. Meals are never solitary. Even in silence, they are shared. Someone mutters about eggs again. Always eggs. How the hens have gone quiet in the cold. How they peck but don't lay. You think of the times you've cracked one open and dropped it into boiling pottage, watching the white swirl, the yolk firming in the heat. a rich golden crown in the middle of your dull gray stew. That's a breakfast memory worth clinging to. But today, there are no eggs. Today, there is only the scrape of bread against your teeth and the echo of another man's apple on your tongue. You think about the children back home. The youngest is probably gnawing at a heel of bread, her cheeks sticky with mash. Your son may already be fetching water or tending to the piglet. You wish you could have left more food behind, but the larder is low, and the barley is thinning fast. You plan as you eat, quiet mental accounting. You'll need to collect firewood tomorrow. Maybe trade with old Lean for a scoop of dried beans. She likes your wife's stitching. Perhaps another tunic sewn from scrap could be bartered for food. Your thoughts drift toward the herbs growing near the abbey wall. Wild mint, if you're lucky. Enough to steep in water and make something that feels like tea. It's not breakfast, but it's something warm to hold. Then your mind turns again, not to dreams, but to hard truth. Bread is the cornerstone of your breakfast, and yet even that is unreliable. In times of poor harvest, the flour grows short. You've eaten bread made with acorns, with ground-up bark, with mossy old rye that gave you stomach cramps for a week. The miller does what he can, but he's stretched thin, and you do what you must. The bread of the poor is dense, dark, and heavy. It's not soft. It doesn't rise with joy. It sits in your belly like stone and says, "Work now." It isn't meant for pleasure. It's meant for endurance. And yet, you remember one day when the baker in town had made too many loaves and gave one to your wife. Just one. Still warm, its crust crackling, the scent filling your home like incense. You didn't wait. You tore it open and dipped it in milk, real milk, because the cow had just calved and gave enough for all. That was a breakfast. A morning touched by heaven. You can still taste it even now. You shake the memory loose. Your hands must return to the soil. The bell rings faintly from the village. It's near midday. Time passes differently when your stomach is never full. The gap between breakfast and supper stretches like a chasm. You live inside that hunger. But sometimes in the folds of routine you find small glimmers, like the flatbread your wife makes when the oven stones are hot. She mixes flour and water and a bit of lard, if there is any, then presses it thin and lays it directly on the hearthstone. It bubbles and scorches and comes out blistered and smoky. Eaten fresh, it's better than anything you've had in months, even without honey. Even without butter. You think of that now, and your mouth twitches into something close to a smile. Maybe she'll make some soon. Maybe you'll gather the herbs. Maybe this week will surprise you. You stand again, your knees crackling. The others rise too without needing to speak. Everyone knows it's time. The break is over. The work returns. But even as your hands dig and your spine bends, your thoughts remain tucked in the folds of cloth, back home in the bread bin, the clay pot, the small pouch of grain. Breakfast has passed, yes, but it lingers in the mind, in the hope for tomorrow, in the belief that even simple food can be sacred. Because every morning when you wake to cold air and hard bread, you wake with the chance to feed your family again, to boil water, to stir the pot, to chew slowly, to survive. And for a medieval peasant, that is enough. By the time the sun sits just past its zenith, your limbs are leaden. The damp earth clings to your boots like it has a mind of its own. Still, you press on. The memory of breakfast, faint as it is, continues to push you forward. It's no longer taste, it's principle. That little bowl of morning grain, was your flag into battle. Now you're simply following through. And yet even now your thoughts drift. Hunger is never far. In this life, food isn't just about sustenance. It's time. It's energy. It's meaning. A day begins and ends around it. And for peasants like you, breakfast has its own kind of ceremony, one defined not by wealth or options, but by perseverance and quiet resolve. Back home, your wife is likely already planning tomorrow's meal. Not because she has plenty, but because she must stretch what little she has, like gold leaf over bread. She's watching the levels in the barley sack, counting the eggs the hen might not lay, checking if there's enough firewood to keep the pot warm long enough to boil the oats into something thick. She knows, as you do, that a poor breakfast makes for a poor day. Your village is not large, but it's old. The kind of place that's sunk deep into the earth, shaped by centuries of sun and frost. Each family has their rhythm, their way of doing things. But food, especially breakfast, binds you all together. You remember the smith whose forge burns hot before most men wake. He eats a different kind of breakfast, quick, greasy if he's lucky. Sometimes a slice of pork fat, hardened and cold. A piece of coarse bread soaked in ale. Something dense enough to keep his arms swinging through noon. His son told you once they'd even fried scraps of meat with garlic in a pan stolen from a battlefield long ago. A stolen pan, a stolen spice. Luxury out of chaos. Then there's the priest. The church doesn't eat like you. He fasts often, and when he doesn't, he eats simply lentils, pulses, sometimes fine bread if the abbey sends gifts. But he's not hungry. Not really. His role keeps him fed in a way yours doesn't. You think of your neighbor Bertha, widowed and worn. She wakes earlier than all of you, lights her fire in the dark, and cooks in silence. Her breakfast is more ritual than meal. She prepares a bowl of mash and eats slowly, with eyes half closed, as if trying to remember what it was like to eat beside someone else. You've brought her wood before. In return, she gave you a lump of cheese wrapped in linen, hard as stone but rich with flavor. You ate it that morning with fresh bread, the last of the week, and the warmth stayed in your bones until nightfall. That was a good day. But not all breakfast is remembered so kindly. There are the mornings when you've eaten nothing at all, when grain runs out, when rain spoils the cellar, when the rats take more than their share. Hunger has a sharpness in the morning. It makes your hands tremble when you try to lace your boots. It makes you snap at your children when they ask if there's more. And worse than that, it follows you all day, gnawing like a tooth that won't stop aching. That's when you get desperate. You scrape moss from rocks. You boil weeds. You add water to yesterday's soup until it's barely colored broth. Your wife once made cakes from ground nettle and ash flour. Bitter, yes, but warm. And warmth is everything when your belly is empty. In spring, there's hope. The thaw brings wild greens, small mushrooms, early herbs. You forage before breakfast, bending low with a basket and fingers half frozen. It isn't much, but a handful of greens stirred into gruel gives it color, and color makes you believe it might taste better. Sometimes it does. There's an art to that illusion. To make something poor feel full. You've seen your wife stir a pot with such patience, layering scraps of root and sprigs of herb into the barley until it looks like more than it is. She serves it with care, as though presentation might fool the hunger into silence. And sometimes it does. You've done it too. Crumbled stale bread into a bowl, poured hot water over it, added a splash of ale and called it soup. Your daughter once called it feast soup. You both laughed. But you also ate every last drop. You remember times of plenty, too brief as they were. After harvest, when the grain was fresh and the kitchen warm. when there was lard to spread on bread, or a pot of milk to stir into oats. The cow had just calved, the chickens were laying, and you were flush with food. Those mornings were different. You moved with energy. You sang while working. You dared to think ahead to tomorrow, to next week, even to winter. But the wheel turns fast in your world. From feast to famine in a month. From warm milk to dry crusts before the first frost. That's why breakfast matters so much. It's the first measure of how close you are to trouble. And you're always close. You pause to stretch your back, listening to the wind ripple through the nearby trees. You breathe deep. Somewhere smoke rises from a chimney. Someone has bread in the oven. You can smell it faint and sweet. You close your eyes, let the scent wash over you. It smells like comfort, like safety, like something you may not taste again for weeks. But the thought of it helps. That's the strange thing about breakfast. Even when it's gone, it stays with you. Its memory gives you strength. The warmth of porridge on your tongue, the crunch of crust between your teeth. The rich surprise of a bit of cheese, it all echoes in your bones. You keep those echoes close. They're your armor. Because when the morning comes again, and the fire is stubborn, and the barley is low, you'll still rise. You'll stir the pot, tear the bread, pour the water. And even if the meal is plain, you'll eat it with the knowledge that you're still here, and that in this life is everything. As the afternoon deepens and the work continues, the sun begins its slow descent behind the hills, casting long shadows across the furrows you've carved into the earth. Your shoulders burn. Your hands sting. Your stomach murmurs again, as if it never quite understood that breakfast had already happened. You chew on a memory to silence it. This one takes you back to your grandmother's hearth long before you worked these fields yourself. You remember the creak of her spoon against the pot, the way she'd hum as she stirred the oats. There was a rhythm in her cooking, as steady as prayer. She never had much, but there was always something warm in the bowl by sunrise. Even if it was just boiled millet thickened with cabbage water, she made it feel sacred. Back then, you didn't know how poor you were. A crust of bread soaked in warm milk felt like decadence. The rare mornings when a neighbor's gift of wild honey made it to your table, those were feasts etched in your bones. She once grated a withered apple into the morning pottage and called it market stew. You still remember the way the sweetness surprised your tongue. But now you know. You know what it costs to create even the smallest comfort in the morning. The firewood must be chopped. The grain must be stored safely from rats and mold. The cow must stay healthy. The hens must lay. And even then, fate must be kind. Breakfast is a gamble every day, and yet, it's the thing that steadies you. You think again of how the village wakes together, how each family stirs a similar pot. Each mother wakes to the same cold hearth. Each child opens their eyes hoping for something warm. There's unity in that struggle. Not equality, never that. Some have more than others. The reeve eats better than you. The tanner's wife brags of dried sausages strung from their rafters. But still, everyone begins their day by feeding the flame, boiling the grain, and quieting the hunger. Even the lords have their breakfasts, though theirs are gilded affairs, roasted pheasant, sugared fruits, fine breads, milk curdled into soft cheese, eggs poached gently in vinegar. You've only glimpsed it once. When you delivered firewood to the manor, the cook had left the door ajar, and you saw a table groaning under silver dishes and golden goblets. It wasn't just food. It was wealth in edible form, and yet you remember the way the servant boy snuck a dry crust from the corner of the kitchen. Even among abundance, there are mouths that go forgotten. You return to the present, to your hands rough and soil-streaked, gripping the haft of your tool. The bell in the distance tolls for none, but it's enough to tell you it's nearly time to return home. You feel the anticipation build, not just to rest, but to eat, to feel something warm in your belly again. But you don't imagine a feast. You know what's waiting. You've lived this day before. The pottage, now cold, will be reheated. It will be thicker, the starches having settled. If you're lucky, the edges will crisp against the iron pot, and you'll scrape them off. Those crisped bits are the closest thing to indulgence. Maybe your wife found an onion that had begun to sprout, but still held flavor. Maybe the youngest child found wild sorrel behind the shed and brought it home in her apron. If so, supper will taste a little brighter. If not, it will still be enough. And tomorrow morning you'll eat again, just barely. The truth is, breakfast isn't a meal in the way modern folk think of it. There is no full table, no steaming mugs, no endless choices. Your morning meal is a fragment, a whisper of sustenance, but it is not meaningless. It tells you you're alive. Sometimes breakfast is just a handful of soaked oats left to soften overnight and stirred with fingers still warm from sleep. Other times it's nothing but leftover mash, eaten cold in silence. And in the worst moments, it's just the scent of food as you pass someone else's door, your own stomach empty, but your feet still moving. But even then, you don't give in. You remember the fasting seasons, the long days leading up to Lent, when even your usual pottage becomes too indulgent. No meat, no milk, just grain and water boiled to simplicity. The church says it is cleansing. The body says it is cruel. You honor it anyway, because you were taught that hunger purifies even as it weakens. And yet the real fast is not a season. It's your life. But you endure it with dignity, because there are still small victories. When you open the flour sack and find enough for 3 loaves, when you lift the hen and feel the warm weight of an egg beneath her, when your son brings home mushrooms you recognize as safe, when the fire catches on the first strike. These things are as precious as gold. You arrive at the edge of the village, boots caked in mud, arms heavy. The air smells of smoke and damp wool. You pass the butcher's cottage where a thin smell of broth drifts through the shutter. He's boiling bones again, maybe for his own supper. He rarely sells to peasants unless they have something to trade. You greet a neighbor with a nod. She's carrying a bundle of dry kindling. Her face is streaked with soot, but her eyes are kind. You exchange no words, but the glance is understood. We made it through another day, and tomorrow you'll do it again. With a little bread, a little barley, maybe a bit of cheese or a splash of ale. Whatever you can find. Because you must. Because breakfast is not just about eating. It's a quiet declaration of survival. And in the still hours before dawn, when the fire hasn't caught, when the pot is still empty, and when your children still sleep under ragged blankets, you rise. You light the fire. You stir the pot. You begin again. The cottage door creaks open as you step inside, stooping slightly through the low frame. The air within is thick with the familiar scents of home, damp straw, old wood, faint ash, and something faintly sour, the remnants of this morning's pottage. It's quiet now, save for the soft breathing of your children in the corner and the subtle crackle of kindling beneath the hearth pot. Your wife glances up. She doesn't speak, but you can tell by her eyes she's tired too. She gestures with her chin to the fire. You follow her gaze and see that she's managed to revive it. A miracle in itself, considering how wet the wood has been this week. The pot above it steams faintly. supper, or the memory of breakfast warmed back to life. You sit, your bones ache as they settle onto the low stool. You feel the weight of the day pressing into your shoulders, and beneath that the subtle buzz of hunger. You hadn't noticed it while working. It had dulled to a background hum. But now in the comfort of your home, the hollowness stirs again. She stirs the pot. The thickened pottage resists the spoon. You can tell it's the same as this morning. Only now more porridge than soup. Denser. Heartier. You catch a glimpse of a green sliver, maybe leek or wild garlic. Your eyes follow every dip and swirl, as if by watching closely you might taste it sooner. She ladles out small bowls, one for each child first, always. The littlest gulps it down, licking the spoon like it holds treasure. You smile at the sight. Your middle boy eats slower, dipping a crust of bread into his bowl and letting it soak. The bread breaks apart, old but still edible. Then your wife hands you a bowl. You cradle it with both hands, letting the heat seep into your fingers, up through your wrists, into your very bones. You breathe in the scent, earthy barley boiled root, and that whisper of onion or leek. It's not much, but it's enough to feel real. You take your first spoonful. The texture is thick, more solid than it was this morning. It sticks to your tongue, then slides down your throat with comforting warmth. It's bland, yes, but also familiar, like a song you've heard since birth. You chew slowly. You always do. There's no rush. You want it to last. You talk just a little. Your wife tells you the hen laid nothing. The pig is still limping, but she found some wild thyme behind the chapel, and there's enough left to dry some for later. You nod. Small victories. And they matter. The talk turns, as it always does, to tomorrow. What's left in the larder? What might be bartered? What needs mending? And always what can be spared for breakfast. You glance toward the shelf where the barley sack sits. Still some left. Enough for another pot. You exhale, quietly grateful. A morning without food is a cruel thing. Not just for the hunger, but for the silence it brings. A family without breakfast is a family that starts its day hollow. Your wife eats slowly, eyes half closed. She savors it. Not the flavor necessarily, but the feeling of having something warm to hold. The fire glows softly beside her. Its flicker catches on her cheekbones, the ones more prominent than they once were. You remember when her face was rounder, when she used to hum as she cooked. She hums less these days. But tonight, the children are fed. The fire is strong. And the breakfast that began the day has found its echo in supper. There's no dessert, no sweets. The idea is almost comical. You once heard a traveler say that nobles in the South eat sugared almonds and drink cinnamon milk in the morning. It sounded like a story meant to mock you, but the man swore it was true. You've never tasted cinnamon. You doubt you ever will. Instead, your final bite is a corner of crust soaked in the last of the pottage. You chew it slowly, pushing it around your mouth to stretch the moment. The bowl is clean when you finish, and you scrape the spoon along the sides for the last of the sticky bits. Your wife stacks the bowls. No plates here, just simple wooden ware carved long ago by a neighbor in exchange for dried herbs. The spoons, too, are mismatched. One is cracked and tied with linen. You've meant to repair it for weeks. You sit in silence for a moment, not because there's nothing to say, but because you're full in the only way that matters, here not stuffed, not satisfied, but sustained. The children curl under their blankets. One asks, "Will we have more in the morning?" And your wife answers softly, "We will." And you believe her. Because belief is what breakfast needs. Belief that the grain will last, that the hens will lay, that the frost won't come too soon, that somehow something warm will find its way to your hands by dawn. You stoke the fire once more, letting it burn just enough to chase away the night's worst chill. The embers will stay hot if you're lucky, and you won't need to struggle with flint in the morning. You place the pot near the ashes, ready to fill it again come sunrise. Tomorrow the process will begin anew. The same barley, the same water, the same thin slice of bread. Maybe a sprig of herb, maybe not. But it will be a meal, and it will matter. Because in a world where everything is uncertain, weather, illness, war, lords, and taxes, the simple act of eating in the morning, of sharing warmth and grain and silence, becomes an act of hope. And that hope will carry you once more into the fields. The morning comes before your body is ready. You feel it first as a chill on your cheek, the blanket having slipped sometime in the night. Then the ache in your hips from the straw mattress, uneven and worn. And then predictably, hunger. That persistent companion. Even before your eyes open, your stomach is already speaking. A quiet groan, not desperate yet, but alert, expectant. It remembers the promise made when you fell asleep that in the morning there would be food. You sit up slowly. The room is still dim. The fire, thankfully, has survived the night. A faint orange glow radiates from beneath the ash. You blow gently, coaxing the embers to wake. A few twigs, a dry splinter, and the flame returns, thin and blue. You feed it like a child, piece by piece. Your wife stirs next, rising without a word. There's no conversation yet, just the quiet agreement that it's morning and the work must begin. She reaches for the pot, now cold from last night's supper, and rinses it with a bit of leftover broth before placing it back above the flame. You go to the shelf and check the barley sack. Lighter than yesterday. You can tell just by touch. But there's enough. Maybe 4 meals left if you're careful. You measure out a scoop. Not generous, not meager, just enough. She adds water from the bucket already gathered yesterday evening. There's no need to leave the house just yet, not until the sun climbs a little higher. The bucket's surface is faintly icy, a sign of the night's bite. But the water is clean, and that alone is a gift. You stir while she tends to the children. The grains spin in lazy circles as the fire begins to boil. It's a rhythm you know well, like breathing. You break the last of yesterday's crust into smaller chunks, softened by the heat of the pot. Your eldest appears behind you, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in wild peaks. He doesn't speak, but leans against your shoulder. You hand him the spoon. Let him stir. Let him feel the day begin. This is breakfast, not just the food, but the act, the ritual, the fire, the silence, the smell of steam rising as barley softens, the crack of bread breaking the hush of children waking. Soon the others join. Your wife cradles the youngest to the girl still curled in her shawl like a kitten. She feeds her with gentle fingers, dipping bread into the barley mash and pressing it to her lips. The child accepts it sleepily, eyes barely open. You all eat slowly, carefully. It's warm today, thicker than usual, maybe because you let the fire build higher. There's a bit of dried pea in it too, saved from a trade 3 days back. You hadn't noticed it go in. Your wife must have slipped it in quietly, a surprise. The flavor is richer, earthy, subtle. You don't comment on it. But you notice. You dip your bread chew, swallow. Every bite matters. Even the simplest food has meaning when you eat like this together, after sleep with the cold still nipping at the corners of the room. You remember a conversation from last spring with a tanner passing through from another village. He said his wife made oatcakes for breakfast, flat pan-fried, pressed thin, and dusted with flour. Sometimes, if she was feeling generous, she'd drizzle a bit of honey on top. He spoke about it with pride. Nostalgia. You'd never had an oatcake, not truly. But you'd tried something similar when your neighbor shared her recipe after harvest. Coarse oats soaked overnight, then pressed flat and roasted on a slate stone near the fire. It wasn't sweet, but it held shape and crisped on the edges. You remember that texture. You remember eating it with your hands still warm, the crispness snapping between your teeth like a rare delight. That was a good breakfast. You'd had 3 cakes that morning, a luxury. But today there are no oatcakes, just the same mash, thick and hot, the same barley, the same silence. And yet you're grateful, because the fire held through the night, because the barley sack wasn't empty, because your children are eating. You think of those who didn't make it through the winter, families who didn't have enough. Old Tomlin who froze in his sleep after a fever took his strength. The widow's son who wasted away after the grain spoiled. These aren't stories. They are faces, graves, empty homes, and that makes this morning sacred. You scrape your bowl clean, careful not to waste even a smear. Your wife does the same. The children too. Even the youngest, now more awake, sucks her thumb and gazes at the pot like it might give her more. You stand stretch. The aches begin again. But so does the day. Your wife begins wrapping the children in wool and linen, preparing them for chores. You pull on your boots, stiff from yesterday's mud. The cold bites your toes through the leather. You gather your tools. The fire dims behind you, left to burn low until evening. The pot is rinsed. The barley returned to the shelf. Another morning done. And even though the taste is already fading, the warmth stays. Deep in your belly. Enough to walk, to bend, to sew. You step outside into a gray sky and a wind that whispers of spring. Maybe if the weather holds, the herbs will return. Maybe the leeks will fatten. Maybe breakfast next week will taste just a little greener, maybe. You make your way back to the fields, boots pressing into soft, damp soil, the cold wind tugging at your cloak. Your breath clouds before you as you walk. The sky above is heavy with low clouds, thick and unmoving, casting the land in a muted pewter light. Breakfast sits warmly in your belly now, not filling, but anchoring. Enough to give your limbs the will to move. Enough to keep the shiver from becoming a shake. It will wear off by midday as always, but for now the memory of barley and heat steadies you. You pass by the Reeves barn where 2 men are already unloading a wagon. You catch the scent of damp hay and dung, and beneath it, a richer smell. Bread. Someone's baking. Likely from yesterday's flour ration. You wonder if they added lard. You wonder if it's still warm. The thought makes your mouth tighten, not in jealousy, but in longing. There's a difference. You don't resent others for eating well, but it reminds you of what's possible, what might come again if luck holds. You remember the harvest 2 years ago, the one so good the fields hummed with grain. Your family had enough flour to bake bread for breakfast 3 times a week. Real bread, not the hard heels left from supper. Your wife mixed in herbs and pressed wild garlic into the crust. Once she even crushed dried berries into the dough. The children still talk about that loaf. You remember waking to the smell, how it pulled you from sleep before your eyes even opened. How it filled the cottage like song. You dipped the warm bread in a bowl of milk, thickened slightly with oats, and eaten it by the fire while the rooster crowed outside. You didn't speak much. No one needed to. It was the kind of breakfast that silenced worry. For a day you felt like the hunger had been banished. But harvests turn. Just as easily the next year brought rain, mildew, rot. The grain spoiled before it could be ground. You went back to boiling bark-thickened mash and trading for hard biscuits from the tanner's wife. Still, you remember that bread, that taste. It gives you something to walk toward. Back in the fields, you join the others. Shoulders hunch, hoes lift, soil turns. You speak little as always. There's no energy for chatter when each breath is precious. But someone mentions the baker's son, who's taken to stealing sips of cream from the monastery cow. It sparks soft laughter, quiet, indulgent. A bit of gossip flavored with envy. You think of cream. You've had it once, maybe twice. Thick and sweet, rising to the surface of fresh milk left overnight. You poured it over a bit of baked apple once, years ago, when the orchard yielded, and your wife dared to light the oven for a treat. The cream had melted into the soft fruit and turned it into something almost sacred. That wasn't breakfast exactly. It had come at midday, but the memory of it slips into your morning thoughts, and for a moment you chew the memory like a crust of bread. Someone brings up the coming Saint's Day. There might be gifts of food from the manor if the Lord feels generous. Bread, maybe cheese. On rare years, even salted meat. You nod at the thought. It would make a difference. Those are the days when breakfast feels like more than just function. It becomes something celebratory, a reason to rise early. You remember once receiving a bit of fish on a feast morning, dried and brined. You cooked it with oats and onions, letting the salt melt into the grain until the whole pot smelled like the sea. You ate slowly that morning, reverently. Your children asked if it was festival day. Yes, you said. Because we eat like it is. Today won't be like that, of course. Today is just another day. But still, the thought lingers. Maybe the Saint's Day will bring more. Maybe not. But the wondering itself is a kind of warmth. You work until the sun reaches its uncertain peak. Your arms ache. Your legs stiffen. The breakfast has long faded. You've drunk only a bit of ale, since not enough to quell the growl returning to your belly. Still, you don't stop. You can't. You think about tomorrow. You plan. Not in hours, but in ingredients. What's left in the sack. Whether you can spare one of the last apples in the loft. Whether it's worth feeding the chicken extra to coax an egg. You remember a woman from the far edge of the village, Marta. She used to make a kind of porridge pancake, pressing mash into a flat cake and cooking it on a heated stone. No oil, just heat and patience. You've tried to copy her method. Once it worked. It had a crust. The children called it morning bread, even though it wasn't. You might try it again if there's enough mash left after supper tonight. That's the thing about breakfast here. It's not just a meal. It's an experiment, a puzzle. How many ways can you make oats and barley feel new? How many tricks can you find to fool hunger into thinking it's been heard? You reach into your satchel and find nothing, not even crumbs. You check again anyway. Empty. You knew it would be. You just hoped. You rub your fingers together and watch the field. Someone's lighting a pipe. Another's adjusting a ragged scarf. The wind picks up again. You think about fire, about the pot waiting at home, about the little bits you'll scrape together before sleep, and the promise you'll make again to wake, to boil, to feed. And you'll keep it, because you always do. By late afternoon, your arms are trembling, not from cold, but from the relentless labor that never seems to pause. Your shoulders are knotted tight. Your hands, calloused and sore, feel heavier with each stroke of the hoe. The muscles pull tight as rope, but this is nothing new. This is just how it is. This is life. And breakfast hours behind you now has long since burned away. Still, you keep going. Because when you're a medieval peasant, stopping isn't an option. The field must be turned. The rows must be sown. The work must be finished before the sun disappears, before the air chills, and the frost begins creeping across the land again. But as you move, your thoughts reach once more toward the hearth, toward the pottage pot, toward the promise of warmth. That thought, the quiet belief that there's something waiting, however small, pulls you through. It's not even about flavor anymore. It's about survival. It's about having something to soften the edge of the hunger that's begun gnawing at your insides again. You can already feel your belly beginning to tighten in that familiar way, the dull ache behind the ribs, the hollow echo inside you. Your mind wanders again back to the monastery. You remember the time you were hired to carry firewood to the monks. They paid you in silence and soup. A plain bowl, yes, but richer than anything you'd had in months. Lentils and carrots and something else, some spice you didn't recognize. You remember the warmth, the way it spread across your chest and settled into your limbs like a blanket. You remember thinking this must be what breakfast tastes like for people who aren't starving. You hadn't dared ask for more. Even now, you don't begrudge the monks. They grow what they can, they give when they're allowed. And sometimes when there's extra, they pass out bread to the poor on feast days. You've stood in line with your children more than once, cloaks pulled tight against the wind, waiting for a crust of bread or a bowl of barley. It's humiliating, yes, but it's also mercy. And mercy in your world is rare. Someone nearby curses the plow broke again. You hear the clang of iron, the mutter of disappointment. You offer a glance, a shrug. There's nothing you can do, not without tools of your own. You think of the blacksmith and the breakfast he must have eaten to face a day like his. Probably something hot, something fatty. He has access to meat sometimes. You know he keeps goats, goat's milk. You had it once warm and strange. A bit sour, but still better than the river water. You remember dipping your bread in it and pretending it was soup. You close your eyes, briefly resting your back against a tree at the edge of the field. Your satchel is empty, your water jug nearly so. You tip it back, just a swallow remains. It's enough to wet your mouth. But it doesn't satisfy. Not like breakfast used to when you were a child and didn't know any better. Back then, the mash felt like abundance. You didn't see the cracks in the bowl or the watered-down grain. You only saw the spoon, the rising steam, the smile on your mother's face as she handed it to you. She used to sing, just softly. Old village songs that no one remembers now. You can still hear her voice humming as she stirred. A song and a spoon. That was breakfast. And now you're the one stirring. You're the one passing bowls, breaking bread, dividing grain. You try to keep the warmth alive. Not just in the food, but in the way you serve it. You try to smile. You try to make it matter. Because you've learned something vital in this life. It's not the ingredients that make a meal. It's how they're shared. You rise again, joints popping, knees stiff. The wind has changed. There's a wetness in the air, a sign of rain by morning. You'll have to cover the woodpile. You'll have to check the thatch for leaks. You'll have to do it all before bed, before rest, before sleep can take hold. But first supper. And really supper is just breakfast repeated. The same grain, the same pot, the same hope. You wonder sometimes what it would feel like to have different meals. a true breakfast, then a separate midday meal, then supper, all distinct and varied. You've heard nobles do that. A meal upon waking, a light snack mid-morning, a heavy feast in the evening. Fruit, cheese, game, honeyed wine. It seems excessive, impossible, like something from stories. You don't live in that world. You live in this one. A world where breakfast is simply the first warm bite to quiet the cold, where a splash of ale in the mash feels like indulgence, where porridge that clings to the spoon is a blessing, where the crust of a 4-day-old loaf softened in hot broth becomes something close to joy. That's the world you know. And somehow, even inside its harshness, it holds its own quiet grace. The bell tolls in the distance. Once. Then again. Time to return. Your legs ache with every step, but the thought of the fire of the pot of the bowl pressed into your palms that pulls you forward. And tomorrow morning you'll do it again. You'll rise before the sun. You'll kneel before the hearth. You'll add water to barley and pray that it thickens. You'll pass the bowl from hand to hand, each person dipping and chewing, slowly breathing steam. And in those moments, brief and fragile, you will remember that you are still alive. And that somehow is enough. The walk home feels longer than usual, your boots dragging against the packed dirt path, the occasional stone sharp beneath the worn leather soles. The sun is sinking now, slow and low, casting an amber haze across the edge of the fields. You pass by other cottages, some quiet, some with smoke, curling softly from chimneys. Everyone's returning. Everyone's hungry. You feel it more now, the pull in your belly. The hollowness that has returned since breakfast faded sometime around midday. And it's not just hunger. It's weariness. The kind of exhaustion that lives not only in your body but in your spirit. The kind that hums beneath your ribs and settles into the back of your throat. You think of the pot, always the pot. It has become a symbol to you more than just a vessel. It holds what little comfort the world still offers. Every morning and every evening you return to it. You lift the lid with the same reverence you've seen priests reserve for chalices. Because inside that soot-darkened pot is survival. Not much more, but never less. Tonight the mash will be thinner. You know it without asking. You'd used more than usual in the morning to stretch toward warmth. That means the evening portion will be modest. A broth, perhaps, barely clinging to the spoon. But there might still be crusts to dip. And if you're lucky, the fire will have kissed the bottom of the pot enough to create those crisp bits. The scraps you fight over silently. You pass old Lean's hut, her shutter open slightly, a small candle glowing within. She's old now, too old for the fields, but she still makes a kind of morning cake when the flour allows. Her secret is to add dried apple, then mash it flat into the iron pan until it blisters. Once years ago, she gave you one, still warm, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. You'd walked home slowly that day, cradling it like a treasure, then split it 5 ways among your family. Even the smell had made your daughter weep. Your stomach growls at the memory. You press your hand to it and walk faster. By the time you reach your own cottage, the sky is bruising into twilight. The door is ajar, the hearthlight flickering warmly inside. You step through and exhale. The fire is alive. The smell of barley and onions fills the room. Your wife turns from the pot with tired eyes and a slight nod. The children cluster near her bowls in hand. You hear the scrape of spoon against wood, the soft silence of anticipation. You sit. The heat of the room wraps around you like a blanket. It's enough to forget for a moment how cold your fingers had grown. Your bowl is handed to you. The mash is as you expected, thin, more broth than meal. But there's flavor onion, maybe a touch of salt from the stone jar near the shelf. You take your spoon and stir. Steam rises soft and fragrant. The first bite slides across your tongue. It doesn't bite back. It doesn't resist. But it comforts. And that is what you need. You glance toward your son, who is licking his spoon clean. He looks up, grins through barley-smeared lips, and says, "Tastes like last year's feast day." You smile, because it doesn't. But you're glad he remembers it that way. You eat slowly, dragging each bite into a ritual. Your wife has added a sliver of something sharp, mustard greens perhaps, a foraged leaf from near the fence line. It gives the bland broth a spark, just enough to trick your senses into thinking it's a new dish. You imagine again the meals of the manor, how they change day to day. Bacon, cream, sausages fried in dripping, custards and pies, sweet fruit preserved in jars. You've seen their table once at a distance. You've heard the kitchen boys brag, but that world is as far from yours as the moon is from the sea. Still, you have this. You take the last bite. You scrape the bowl clean. Your wife saves a small bit in the pot, covering it with a cloth to cool overnight. Tomorrow's beginning preserved in tonight's end. That's how it works. Breakfast is never created from abundance. It's gathered from remains, from what was spared, from what survived the night. Your daughter falls asleep on the floor, cheek pressed to the stones, warmed by the hearth. Your eldest begins sharpening a broken knife. Your wife washes the bowls in silence, and you stare at the dying fire, watching the flames flicker low. You think about tomorrow's breakfast. The barley will stretch one more time. After that, you'll need to visit the reeve, or trade, or go without. You'll rise before the light, listen to the fire's quiet sigh, and once again stir the pot. You wonder what the morning will taste like, and you pray it's warm. The fire burns low into the night, throwing shadows along the walls, flickering against the wooden beams of the ceiling. You're the last one awake now. The children are bundled together in the corner beneath the wool blankets, their breathing soft and even. Your wife lies curled beside them, one hand resting protectively over the youngest, the rhythm of her breath, calm, steady. You sit by the hearth with your hands outstretched, letting the heat soak into your fingertips, eyes fixed on the glowing embers. You're not awake by choice. You're awake because your mind won't sleep. It's counting, weighing, planning, wondering how much barley remains, whether the hen might lay tomorrow, whether the herbs you foraged last week will dry properly and last the month. Your eyes drift toward the shelf where the food is kept. You know every item on it. Not just what's there, but what used to be, what might be added, what will be missed. The pot sits by the ashes, now scraped clean, the last warmth fading from its iron belly. But even cold and empty, it still carries the memory of supper, of breakfast, of the days you managed to make something out of nearly nothing. You know you'll return to it again in just a few hours before the rest of the world wakes. You'll rinse it, fill it, and stir once more. There's comfort in that, in the repetition. The predictability of struggle, yes, but also the predictability of effort. You've come to understand that there is a kind of grace in doing the same thing each day and surviving anyway. The world does not change for you, but you learn to meet it. And you meet it first every morning with your hands around that pot, coaxing warmth from water and grain. You rise slowly, and tuck the last few coals together. You don't want to lose the fire overnight. If it goes cold, you'll need to strike flint at dawn, and flint is scarce. You lay the smallest sticks atop the embers, watching them smolder. That should be enough. Then you lay down wrapped in your coarse blanket and let sleep come. It isn't long. You wake again while the stars still burn overhead. The world outside is frozen. You can feel it in the air as soon as you sit up sharp and cutting, slicing through the cracks in the wooden walls. Your breath clouds in the dark. You move slowly so as not to wake the others and creep toward the hearth. The fire survived. Barely. The sticks you placed are glowing, huddled together like they're shivering. You breathe on them, feed them again. You begin to move by instinct. The pot is lifted, the water poured, the barley measured, the same as always. Except today the barley is low, lower than you expected. Your hand pauses in the sack. You dig deeper, hoping there's more at the bottom than it appears. But no, it's nearly gone. Enough for this meal, perhaps one more. After that, you'll need to trade, or beg, or fast. You don't speak the thought aloud, not even to yourself. Instead, you pour the grain into the pot, spreading it thin with your palm, willing it to expand, to swell into something more than it is. Your wife stirs behind you, sensing your movement. She doesn't ask questions. She just begins to prepare the bowls. You think again of all the ways you've changed this same grain over the years. Crushed it, soaked it, fried it on flat stones, stirred it with milk when you had it, added herbs, mashed it with garlic, thickened it with stale bread, watered it down when there wasn't enough, let it boil too long, burned it, scraped it, blessed it. Barley is not just food, it is the measure of your imagination. This morning you try something new. You crush a dried clove of wild garlic and toss it into the pot, hoping its sharpness might stretch the flavor. It isn't much, but it changes the scent just enough to feel like you've done something different. When the mash is ready, you ladle it out evenly. Everyone gets a bowl. No more, no less. You eat yours, slowly savoring the heat, even if the taste is thin. Your youngest laughs something about the steam tickling her face. Your wife smiles. And just like that, the moment feels like something more than hunger. You look down at the bowl half full and wonder why something so plain can still matter this much. And then you remember it's because there's nothing else. No promise of more. No banquet waiting. No market brimming with choices. What you hold in your hands is all there is, and that makes it sacred. You finish in silence. Everyone does. And before the bowls are even clean, you're already thinking of tomorrow. The day begins again, as all your days do, cold, gray, and quiet. You wake to the sting of air on your skin and the dull ache of a stomach that was never truly full. Your body rises before your mind does, moving through the motions worn smooth by repetition. Stoke the fire. Stir the coals. Fill the pot. Measure the grain, what's left of it. Today your hand finds the bottom of the sack. It's not a surprise, not really. You'd felt it dwindling. You'd measured more carefully each day, watched the scoop grow lighter, the sound of the grain duller. Still, the silence inside the sack makes your chest tighten. You tip it, hoping a few more barley groats might tumble out. They do. Not enough for a proper breakfast. Barely enough for broth. Your wife sees the look on your face but says nothing. She knows it too. The children are still asleep, faces slack with dreams, unaware that their morning meal will be thinner than ever. Maybe they'll notice. maybe they won't. Hunger can be subtle when you grow up with it. It doesn't announce itself with pain. It becomes a hum, a dull vibration just under your ribs. Still, you make the meal. You crush a few dried peas to bulk it out. Add more water. Stir longer. The scent is faint, no onion, no salt, no garnish. Just the smell of boiling hope. You serve the bowls, keeping your own portion small. The children eat slowly. Your daughter asks if there's any honey. You smile gently, shake your head. She nods, dips her spoon again without complaint. She's learned, like all of you, how to swallow disappointment in the same breath as porridge. The morning passes quietly. The chores stretch out like threadbare cloth. You mend the fence behind the house, fetch water from the well, stack kindling in crooked piles. Your mind stays with that empty sack. You'll need to visit the reeve, and that means bargaining. He won't give grain for nothing. You'll need to offer labor, or something from your stores if you have anything worth parting with. Maybe the bundle of dried herbs, maybe firewood, maybe one of the chickens, though, that would hurt more than help. The walk to the reeve's house is long, and the mud sucks at your boots. His home is larger than yours, built with straighter beams, better thatched glass in the window, though only one pane. Smoke rises from his chimney, the scent of fat drifting through the air. You stand outside, gathering your breath, pushing down the taste of resentment. You knock. The door opens slowly. He sees you and nods before you even speak. He knows why you're here. Everyone knows what an empty grain sack looks like in a man's eyes. Inside, he pours you a cup of small ale, offers no food. You explain what you need. He listens, says little. He'll trade, of course. But not today. He'll need help clearing stones from his pasture. 2 mornings' work. In exchange, he'll give you enough grain to last a week, maybe less if the weather turns. You accept. You always accept. Because you can't eat pride. And your children can't eat silence. You thank him and begin the walk home, tracing the same muddy path past the same stone wall where someone has left a half-eaten apple. You glance at it, consider it, but you leave it. That's not your kind of hunger. Back at the cottage, your wife has started supper, another thin meal stretched with leftover mash and bits of wild greens. She's boiled water twice to make it seem like more. The children are quiet. Even they know that something has shifted. You sit by the fire, watching the pot bubble, watching the embers glow. You stir with the same old spoon, cracked but loyal. Tomorrow you'll rise before dawn and work for the reeve. 2 long mornings. But then you'll return with grain, and there will be breakfast again. It's strange how that thought, just a bowl of porridge in the morning, can feel like salvation. But it does. Because even when your body is sore and your stomach hollow and your soul half asleep from the cold, the promise of food in the morning pulls you forward. Not just the warmth or the taste, but the act of feeding those you love. The small kindness of filling a bowl and pressing it into a small waiting hand. You don't need riches, you need that moment. The pot bubbles, the fire glows. You wait for the light to fade and the day to end. And when it does, you'll sleep. And when you wake, you'll feed the fire. You'll stir the barley. And breakfast will begin again. The next morning begins in darkness, as they all do. The stars are still fading from the sky as you pull the blanket from your shoulders and rise from the straw, bedding the stiffness in your back, as present as the chill in the air. The cottage is silent except for the faint wheeze of one child's breath and the soft creak of the timbers above. Your wife stirs but does not rise. She knows what today is. The first of 2 mornings at the Reeves pasture. You don't eat before leaving. There is no breakfast to spare. Not today. Instead, you rinse your face with the freezing water from the basin, rub your hands together to wake the blood in your fingers, and step out into the brittle dawn. The frost on the ground crunches beneath your feet. Your breath fogs ahead of you, like smoke from a dying wick. You walk fast, not from energy, but from necessity. If you stop, if you slow, the cold will catch you and seep into your bones. At the Reeves, you work. You lift stones, big ones, cold, wet, heavy. You pile them at the edge of the field, hands numb back, bending more with each load. You say little. He says less. The only sound is the steady scrape of boots through frost-bitten grass and the thud of rock against rock. There's no meal break, no fire to gather round, no morning mash passed between tired hands. And yet, even as your stomach groans, your mind begins planning again. The grain he promised, how much it will make, how many scoops to stretch over how many mornings. Whether you'll add water or milk, if milk even flows this week. Whether your wife might have foraged a few stinging nettles to grind into the mash. A bitter addition, but rich in flavor. You tell yourself that tomorrow you will eat again, that tomorrow will start the way it should, with something hot in your hands. By the time the sun climbs overhead, your limbs are trembling. Not from effort, but from emptiness. Your body is running on memory now, on the residue of yesterday's bowl. You push through. You always do. By dusk, the Reeve gives his nod. A sack is placed into your arms. Not large, but weighty. Not full, but enough. You say thank you with your eyes. You don't have breath for words. When you return home, your wife has kept a small fire going. She smiles, not widely, not joyfully, but with that same tired strength that has always kept your home upright. You pour the grain onto the cloth. She begins measuring before you've even removed your cloak. The pot is waiting. The water is hot. A pinch of salt is all that remains from last week, and she adds it without hesitation. Tonight's supper is quick, not thick, not generous, but it is a preview of the morning to come. She saves enough to start the next day with something real. And the next morning you rise, and once again you fill the pot. The fire responds to your touch. The water bubbles. The grain swells and softens. A scent, faint, familiar, forgiving, rises into the cottage. This time the children wake early. They sense something different. The younger boy peers into the pot and smiles. "It's thicker today," he says. You nod. You ladle the barley into the bowls. Each portion is careful but complete. You dip your spoon into yours and taste. It's not a feast, but it's warm. It coats your tongue and sticks to your ribs. You chew slowly. The flavor is plain but steady, like stone, like trust. Your wife sets a crust of bread beside your bowl. You hadn't expected it. She saved it from yesterday's portion. You break it into the mash and let it soften. You remember mornings when you had nothing to break into the pot. And you remember mornings when you had nothing at all. But not today. Today, there is barley and water and warmth. The children eat quietly. Your daughter hums an old tune, something your mother used to sing. Your son tries to balance his spoon on the edge of the bowl. He grins when it falls in. You feel something like peace settle over your shoulders. Not joy, not plenty, but peace. The kind that comes when a morning begins with food. You finish your bowl and scrape the last bits into your mouth. You hold it there, savoring the heat, the texture, the moment. And then, as always, you rise. You set the bowl aside. You pull on your boots. You tie your cloak. The day calls again, but this time you face it with a full belly. And that changes everything. The full belly doesn't last long, but the memory of it does. As the morning stretches on, and your feet return to the muddy track between your home and the fields, you feel the difference. The ache in your stomach is quiet. Your hands move a little quicker. You greet your neighbor with a small nod, and this time he returns it with the faintest smile. Maybe he had breakfast too. You walk past the stream swollen slightly from last night's rain and glance down at the water. It's murky but moving, a sign perhaps that spring isn't far. You know the wild herbs will come first. Bittercress, dandelion, chickweed. Things most nobles would never call food. But for you, they are flavor. They are color in the gray. And they might find their way into your breakfast if you're lucky. The barley you brought home will last 4 more days, maybe 5. Your wife has already begun stretching it. She mixes it with crushed peas, with chopped roots, with scraps of last year's dried turnip. You watch her stir the pot in the morning light. Her hands practiced her movements slow but sure. She doesn't need recipes. She needs memory. She needs instinct. She knows just how much water to add, how long to boil, how to make it look like there's more than there is. And you, with your bowl in hand, watch the steam rise and know that no cook in a castle could make something more sacred. The children begin waking. Your eldest rubs his eyes and asks if there's porridge. You tell him yes. You tell him it's hot. He smiles, not wide, not wild, but grateful. The kind of smile that only comes from knowing what it's like to have gone without. And your daughter, still sleepy, curls in your lap as the bowls are filled. She doesn't speak. She just leans her head against your chest, listening to the quiet thrum of your heart as you hold her spoon in hand. The first bite is warm, thickened with peas, and sweetened slightly from the last of the apple scraps. Your wife must have saved them from yesterday's trade. You look at her. She doesn't meet your eyes, but she knows. You eat in silence, and with each spoonful, the cold recedes a little more. The children eat slowly, licking the edges of their bowls, wiping their mouths with sleeves too short for their growing arms. And then when all the bowls are empty, and the pot has been rinsed and hung over the hearth to dry, you rise. Your hands are rough. Your knees are stiff. But you are fed. The day's labor awaits, but something feels different now. Not easier, but lighter. Because the morning gave you something. It gave you the strength to walk, to dig, to carry. But more than that, it gave you dignity. You step outside and the sky is gray, as it often is. The road is wet, as it usually is. The work is hard, as it always is. But your belly is warm. Your body is moving. And the taste of breakfast, simple, honest, real, still lingers at the back of your tongue. You pass a traveler on the road, a man from another village. His thin eyes sunken. You nod. He doesn't return it. You know that look. He didn't eat this morning, and you wish just for a moment you had saved him a bowl. But that's not how this life works. You keep walking. You keep moving. You keep the fire going. You think of tomorrow. And you know that when the light breaks again and the cold creeps through the cracks and your wife stirs from sleep to rinse the pot, you'll be there. You'll gather the barley. You'll feed the fire. You'll stir the mash. And you'll begin again. Because in this life there is no such thing as a small meal. Not when it is earned. Not when it is shared. Not when it comes after hunger. Breakfast is everything. And now as the fire dies low and the hearth cools once more, you sit back and breathe. The bowl is empty. The house is quiet. The light outside is fading. The same cycle will come again tomorrow. The same labor, the same pot, the same hunger, and if you're fortunate, the same comfort at dawn. You don't know if the barley will last. You don't know what the weather will bring, but you know this morning always comes, and when it does, you rise. You stir, you serve, you endure. It's not a heroic story. No one writes songs about peasants boiling pottage. But there is quiet courage in these mornings, in waking with nothing and still making something, in feeding your children with your hands even when your stomach grumbles louder than theirs. And maybe that's enough. Because you were never meant to be remembered for what you ate, but for how you kept going, how you shared, how you waited, how you loved even when the cupboard was bare. So when the morning comes and you find yourself by the hearth again, may your hands remember the rhythm. May the fire catch quickly. May the grain stretch farther than you expect. And may that first warm spoonful remind you that survival itself is sacred. Rest now. You've earned it.